I was so ignorant and naive to what I was walking into that in a million ways that played to my disadvantage. In a couple ways that played to my advantage. And what I mean by that is it is a type of hard that can't be explained to someone who hasn't done it before. You just have to go experience it. And then when you're on the other side of it, you're like, oh my God, I get it. And then you want to talk as much as you can to people who have been through it. But I just had no idea. And next thing I know, I was so knee deep into acquiring this business and like having my back against the wall, basically, because I had to make it work, that you just have to like keep going. So kind of in summary, I was total deer in the headlights. But again, like all of a sudden you're a couple months in and you have no choice but to keep the boat moving, that you just like almost numb yourself to it, I feel like, and you just show up every day and you do what you have to do.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, a podcast for purpose-led entrepreneurs looking to master the art of buying, selling, or optimizing small businesses. Your host, Chris Seegers, founder of Exceptional Companies and author of Selling Main Street, has over a decade of experience starting, buying, and leading successful businesses. He's here to guide you through the complex world of business transactions and growth. Each week, we dive deep with actionable insights, expert interviews, and real-world strategies to activate and equip you to live exceptionally and build exceptional businesses. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Here's your host, Chris Seegers.
Welcome to the Exceptional Companies Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Chris Seegers, where we explore how to buy, sell, and optimize your small business. Today, I'm joined by a guest that is going to be a recurring guest because I just love everything that she says and does. Tato Corcoran, welcome to the show. So your focus has been small business and real estate. And I always try to start with something that I love. I sent this because this is true. You're a rambunctious human being. And we were just talking about your wedding prep and how people probably think you're crazy. And that's what I love about you. You're also one of the most strong-willed and adaptable people I've ever met. So I'm super excited for you to be here. And I think that is what it takes to be successful in small business acquisition and running those small businesses. So today we've got a topic that no one talked to me about when we started buying businesses, which is how do you keep your mental game strong? And that's both on the pre-due diligence, the due diligence, the acquisition, the optimization. And we get a lot of feedback of, oh, it's so hard to find a business and buy a business. And I'm always thinking in my head, yeah, wait till you actually own the business. And then you're going to be thinking that that was a lot of fun and easy. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about the mental component of buying and owning a business. So let's dive into just one of the first questions. What was one of your biggest mental blocks when you were buying or running a business? Or maybe just start a little bit on the front end of when you bought the business and you realized, oh, shoot, I don't know what I'm doing, which is every single one of us. So let's start there, Tato.
Yeah. So I always say that like, this is just kind of like a blanket statement about my experience. I was so ignorant and naive to what I was walking into that in a million ways that played to my disadvantage. In a couple ways that played to my advantage. And what I mean by that is, and what we're going to get further into is it is a type of hard that can't be explained to someone who hasn't done it before. You just have to go experience it. And then when you're on the other side of it, you're like, oh my God, like I get it. And then you want to, talk as much as you can to people who have been through it. But I just had no idea. And next thing I know, I was so knee deep into, acquiring this business and like having like my back against the wall, basically, because I had to make it work, that you just have to like keep going, So I feel like kind of in summary, I was total deer in the headlights. But again, like all of a sudden you're a couple months in and you have no choice but to keep the boat moving, that you just like almost numb yourself to it, I feel like, and you just show up every day and you do what you have to do. I would say specifically what astounded me was, and this is so funny because prior to buying my business professionally, I was an assistant to a couple of different Fortune 100 executives. I worked for, some of the most famous people in the tech space. Stressful job, right? But I knew how to do it like the back of my hand, and things that other people thought would be so stressful they could never imagine doing it. I was like, oh, that's like my job every day, no big deal. Then I acquire this business and it's a similar type of chaos, but in just a wildly different environment. General labor, manufacturing, construction during COVID, which is a whole other beast. And literally my phone did not stop ringing all day, every day with basically people needing stuff or people upset with you, or, you know, people don't call you to be like, you guys did a great job and you showed up on time. No, they call you when they're mad, right? That was all day long. Your employees never quit needing things. That was all day
Yeah,
long, right? We had no
for
like
sure.
hierarchy. And so every problem was my problem. There was no,
Yeah.
I had to go like, you know, hide in the company's parking lot next door to eat my lunch so that people didn't, you know, I could have like 30 minutes of people not in my
So
face.
that's how you dealt with it, hiding. So that's the
Totally.
first trick and tool is if you need to just
Yep.
take a day and hide for a bit.
Hiding and crying, right? Like, okay, I'm a girl and I own every piece of my girlhood in, you know, this man's world that I've joined. And I cry about everything and I take a lot of things personally. And I came home every day, every other day for the first at least 6 months and just cried and was like, oh my God, you know, what am I doing? Anyways, I'll stop there because I could go on. Clearly, this owned my life for a long time.
Yeah, and I think like in social media, generally we see people saying how sexy it is. A lot of people kind of saying how easy it is, and generally they don't actually own a business. They just have like a little marketing company with one assistant, and all they're doing is marketing them, and their products. Small business ownership is super hard. And we had an experience that was just terrible. In one of our businesses that we own that was a hospitality in 2019, we had one of our manager's daughters murdered here in Colorado. And so you're already dealing with the normal stress of running businesses and just figuring out how to do things well. And then you layer in this situation that you're like, no one is equipped to deal with that, both them and us. And obviously for them, it was way more detrimental. But this gal was kind of like a stepsister to me, like a little sister to me. So we're dealing with this emotional, mental, physical pain and trying to still say, well, what do we do with the business and who's going to run it and how do we continue going? And those are questions that seem so trivial, right, during the process, but they still have to be addressed.
Yep.
And so small business acquisition is so messy. And the mental piece, I think people don't think a lot about it. That's the most important piece. And I'm working on my second book, which is Buying Main Street, which is just a short primer on how to buy a business. And I've got kind of top 5 traits to be a successful acquisition entrepreneur. And one of them is grit. And you and I have talked a lot about that. And you just mentioned it. It's like, hey, when things are terrible, you just show up and you do the best you can and you don't let it fall apart. And then tomorrow when it's terrible, you show up and you don't let it fall apart. And pretty soon you develop this talent and skill. It's not a talent, it's a skill where things start becoming less important, right? Oh, somebody quit on us. You know, we've had 100 people quit on us now, so that's no big deal. Well, the first time someone quits on you, that seems like the end of the world. Or the first time you get sued, you know, we've been sued 4 times and it's like, you know, it's going to work out. The attorneys are going to work things out. We know how to kind of navigate this. So let me tell you a little bit about, or let me ask you a question. Like how, aside from crying and hiding, did you have some other ways that you dealt with the stress and anxiety of the acquisition and kind of onboarding and then running the business? So as you think about last 18 to 24 months, I guess the question is, have you gotten better at it? And then if so, how did you get better at it?
Yeah. So initially it was total survival mode. Total survival mode. I wish I could tell you something more profound than that, but it wasn't. But I will tell you something that you taught me. I love this podcast because I feel like I can come on and say all the things that you taught me, and maybe you didn't even realize it, right? But you were the first person to encourage me to do 2 things. One, go through the worst case scenario exercise. Seems really simple, but in the throes of, you know, just the chaos, you don't think to do that. And you were the first person to tell me to do that. And I did. I sat down and I detailed out like all the worst things that could happen and what those would result in. And because well, this is a subjective statement. You could say I bought not smart or smart. It would depend on your point of view. But in this point of view, because I bought smart, I only paid for the building in which this business operates. My worst case scenario literally was that 100% of my employees leave, 100% of my customers leave. I can't operate the business. I have to liquidate the machinery, which I would find help to, you know, liquidate. And I would be left with a building that I could rent tomorrow and cash flow probably $4,000 a month on. Triple net.
Love it.
That was my worst case.
So worst case scenario exercise. Did you know you're in my book and I changed your name, but I use this exact story?
Oh my God, you're
So
kidding. I
hopefully,
just
I
got
mean, I'm
chills.
going to,
That's absolutely
yeah.
wild.
Okay. So in
So
the
I did that.
premise, yeah, the premise was asymmetric risk. So I said, hey,
Yeah.
here are a couple mental models for how you succeed in small business acquisition. And I love this about your story, which is asymmetric risk is simple. Hey, you want a lot of upside with zero downside. So
Yeah.
you said, I want to buy this business for free. My downside
Mm-hmm.
is I sell the real estate, I break even, and I've learned a bunch of stuff. And maybe I don't
Yeah.
want to own a business, but I've learned a ton. Your
Yep.
upside is you get a business for free, you grow it. Worst case scenario on that side, you're like, hey, in a few years, I'm going to sell it and I'm going to make some money, but maybe not
Mm-hmm.
as much as I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to. Okay. So going back to that point of view, the worst case scenario, that exercise is simply like, all right, when you're in the throe of things, you just think like my life is falling apart, right? Like, and we've had this happen with every
Yes.
business we've bought, right? You're going to lose 30 to 50% of your team, whether because they don't want to come with you or your culture changes and they're like, whoa, this is like, there's accountability and scorecards and metrics now. And so being prepared for that and saying, okay, if we lose 50% of our business, what's the worst case scenario? And the worst case scenario usually isn't that bad. It's like, well, we got 2 or 3 months of rockiness and then we hire some other people and those people are
Yeah.
probably way better. That's why the other people left. And so we use that like in every area of our life. Like even with our kids, it's like our kids are acting out or this or that. It's like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Well, worst case scenario is we don't raise them right and they do really bad, they make really bad life choices. But generally, we're being consistent with them just like we would the
Yeah.
business. So worst case scenario is like, hey, they're probably just going through some emotional thing and we just need to kind of have some patience and grace. Okay, so I love that. So
I just want to
I,
interject really quick about this
please.
because I think it's tough to think to do this proactively, or maybe that was just my experience, but I think that people looking at businesses to acquire could actually exercise the worst case scenario. And I think that they should, because if your
Mm-hmm.
worst case scenario sheds light on that perhaps this business is light on assets or light on people or whatever, then maybe you should think twice, right? Like if you're strictly buying a goodwill business, which obviously I have no experience in, I bought only an asset business. But if you have strictly goodwill, then maybe you should look at what is your worst case scenario because you're putting big debt on an assetless business. People do it all the time. I'm not saying that's bad, but maybe you should explore the other contingencies and what is your worst case scenario? I don't know. I mean, you don't want to default on an SBA loan. It's going to put you out of the game.
Yep, 100%. And that's where like we want people to come to us to help them
Yep.
negotiate asymmetric risk.
Yep.
We've done it in every deal we've bought. I told you about our insurance business that we purchased. It was 97% owner carry. That owner carry, we only guaranteed 300 grand of the total purchase price. And then there was some metrics that basically within 3 months, we had hit some performance hurdles where that guarantee was no longer even in play. And so people always ask, hey, like, is this a good deal? Is that a good deal? Is this the type of business I should buy? And the reality is like, well, almost any deal can be a good deal if you structure it right.
Just going to say that.
Yeah.
Every
So
deal
it's
is a good and bad deal. It's just what you do with it.
100%. If you get the right terms and the right price and
Yeah.
you've said, hey, if I lose the general manager and they go away, but I got the right deal and the right terms and the right price, then you're like, oh, no problem. Like I'll hire
Yep.
somebody else and I'm already going to kind of start doing that and hire an assistant and I've baked in some margin there. So
Do you like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking the subscribe button now and check out our website, www.excoadvisors.com. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
okay, cool. Another point, like, so walking through worst case scenario, that's a tool that you need to use like every day in a business because most of the time our mind goes crazy and does the fight or flight exercise where it's like everything's falling apart. And then you look at it and you're like, this is actually not that bad. And then the second one that you had mentioned, in kind of our relationship is I think you've got to have a tribe of people that you can call when everything's going to hell
Yep.
that have been through it before and will just give you perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you and I have done with each other. And I've got all kinds of mentors that when I, something crazy happens, I'm like, hey, we're getting sued again. Like,
Yep.
what do we need to do? And it's like, okay, hey, this is not a big deal. You're not at fault. It's going to cost you a little money just to clean it up, et cetera. But having a tribe of people, whether it be paid or unpaid, that you can call and say, hey, our machine went down. This is what's happening. We have all this work we need to do. What should we do?
You know what's so incredible about that is, and this is hands down my favorite part of like the hard that we've done over the last many years, is what that tribe ultimately leads you in every single conversation is how unprofound your experiences and your problems are relative to everybody else. So here's an example.
Mhm.
I went and met last year with a business owner who I knew loosely through family friends here in Wisconsin. And he acquired his business. It was definitely like a bigger business than what I acquired, but it was still like owner run and operated, which is like, kind of like a key, characteristic to describe a business. If it's still owner run and operated, then, it's of a certain type. But anyways, long story short, over the last 20 years, they just sold 50% to private equity and they each went and bought a jet. So like that's the ultimate dream, right? I mean, their success cannot be understated. I went and met with him at his just ginormous, gorgeous building. And he was loving hearing my story because it took him back to that time. And literally, I was like, how did you do it? Like, I am just so deep in that like,
Mhm.
I just don't know what I'm doing. And his answer was so unprofound, which made it so profound. He literally was like, no one worked harder than me. That's the
Mhm.
only answer I have for you. I was here 7 days a week for as many hours as I needed to outwork every single person here. And while,
Yep.
you can't just like work a million hours every week forever, it's literally the price of entry no matter what way you slice it initially. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it's the only answer. You know what I mean? Like I was expecting him to be like, well, I got this lucky thing and this thing and this thing, no, that was his only answer. And so like when
Yep.
you take what's happening to you back to the people who are experiencing similar things, you realize that it just is what it is and it's the price of entry. And that's where grit comes in, right? Like it is so fine if you don't want to stomach that. Absolutely. Like zero judgment at all. If entrepreneurship is not for you, like there's a million other amazing career paths and you'll be fantastic. But if you want to do it, it takes a stomach of steel.
Yep. 100%. And what I would say is you start, and maybe this is me, so you can tell me if you're not experiencing this, but I started getting to the point where now I crave having my back against the wall because
I'm not
I'm
there
like, man,
yet.
I'm
I'm
like,
good.
we've done this 9 times, and now I know, like we're gonna make it. We're gonna do it.
Yeah,
We're gonna optimize it.
fair
We're gonna
enough.
get there. And
Yeah,
so then when I go into these chaotic situations, it's this game of saying, all right, guys, how good is our problem solving toolbox? And then what else do we not have in the toolbox that we're going to get from this
you can
experience?
add. Yep.
And my wife was actually asking me because it's like it's been a busy season. We just bought a business. We started another one this year. We started this podcast. I'm writing the second book, and she's like, "Man, you seem like a little lackadaisical." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm kind of bored. Like, I want a big, hairy business that we know nothing about." We had a big construction company we're looking at that fell out. That's fallen out 3 times. Who knows? We may have it bought by the time we have the next podcast, but I was like, you know what? I like the experience
Yeah.
of going into some chaotic mess and cleaning it up. But I think that's once again, like none of this is talent based. None of us are the smartest.
Agreed.
None of us
Agreed.
are the most talented, but we are gaining these skills. And that's where the big high value is. For me, I'm like, man, I know we're going to make good money. I know we're going to have a huge impact, but I love the skills that we're getting. And that's where I think if you want to get on the acquisition entrepreneurship journey, the skills you're going to get apply to every area of your life and are going to
Yep.
create so much value for you. But I will say, like the second business we bought, which was this small town in Colorado with a general store, and we were going to do vacation rentals and wedding and events. It had 4 or 5 different types of business units in it. I had so much anxiety. Oh my gosh. It was like, all right, this is the second thing we've got, but we really leveraged all of our personal cash and all of our personal balance sheet, and it wasn't working. It was like the renovations weren't going well. The employees were terrible. And the amount of anxiety that I had was I couldn't sleep at night. And
Yeah.
so I did exactly what your mentor recommended. I was like, well, I guess we just need to work a little harder. We need to get a
Yeah.
little more creative, and we just need to keep at it. But
Mm-hmm.
if you threw me into that position today, I'd be like, this is so easy. Like, oh my gosh, the skills that I've gotten. So, anyways, that's some encouragement that, like, as we continue on the journey pretty soon, and I think business ownership gives you a perspective about life where you're like,
Yeah.
most of the
Yes, it
things that
does.
derail people, I'm like, that is just not important. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like we have some friends that we're talking about schools, like, oh, we have this huge decision to make with our kids
Mm.
and schools. And they're walking me through the options. And I'm like, okay, so you have three really good options and you've been stressing about this for 3 months. I'm like,
Oh, that's
pick
so
one.
funny.
If it's
Yeah,
not
right.
good, then go
Then
move your kids to the
transfer.
second one.
Yeah,
Like there's
totally.
like not anyway. So I think
That's
people
hilarious.
make, like decisions so big that really are not that critical. And we've had another mental model for decision making, which is kind of two metrics. One is this a moral decision? Like, is
Mm.
this a big decision we can't come back from? And that would be something like, hey, I'm putting myself in a position where, you know, I'm going to cheat on my wife, right? That's a bad
Yeah,
example because I would never do that, but something like that, right? You're
yeah,
never coming back from that.
yeah,
Or I'm putting myself in a position where I'm going to get sued by my employees because I am doing something
yeah,
unethical.
right.
So that decision making matrix is like, okay, immediate no to those decisions. And then all the other non moral decisions go into kind of like, hey, can I come back from this? And if it's like, oh, yeah, then I'm like, sweet, let's do it. And if we're wrong, we'll make a change.
That's another great one. Yeah, absolutely. To use during diligence. Can't say I used that. I was too naive. But, looking back from the other side, absolutely. And I feel like I was like kind of trying to say that earlier with the worst case scenario thing. Like, can you come back from it? Like, wow, I'm going to be leveraged to the hills and I don't have anything else if it goes bad. You going to come back from that? I don't know.
Mhm.
Big gamble, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. So another question that we touched on almost from a perimeter standpoint, but do you think there's a family work balance during this journey? Or
Oh,
what are some things that you would kind of recommend to say, hey, I didn't do it well, but here's maybe what I would have done differently?
so I was just talking about this with someone else. So I'm so glad this came up. I am the type of person who doesn't know how to live a balanced life. Like that might seem crazy, but it's just sort of my personality. Like I'm just always everywhere. Now, I'm also not a mom yet, right? That's definitely on my horizon. I'm not a mom yet. So I might watch this in like 18 months and be like, whew, you know, you had no idea. Maybe, for sure. But I have always had like so many different hustles. Like I don't know how to live other than like just having my hand in all kinds of pots. And interestingly, like I never put a hand in a pot that I'm not like truly committed to, like I only, do the things that I genuinely want to do and will like see through. But I just only know chaos. And I can relate to what you're saying about how you were like, oh, I'm kind of bored. While I don't crave having my back against the wall again yet, still need some more time. But I get it. Like if I don't have like if I don't have a couple things to keep me feeling a little overwhelmed or a little stressed, then it's like I don't know what I'm doing, you know? And I think that's maybe, I don't know how you would quantify that as like a trait, but it's like you have to move mountains every single day, right? And the mountains don't ever get smaller. And if they do get smaller, then respectfully, you're either not growing, right? Or you've just kind of moved into a more comfortable place and no one grows in comfort. They just don't. So, anyways, that like turned into a soapbox, but I don't, balance to me looks different than balance to others, I guess
Yep.
is the best way to put it, right? Balance is subjective. And I know what my balance feels like, and my balance feels like moving mountains. I don't know.
Yep. And I think too, the perspective of life comes in seasons, like
Yes,
short seasons
definitely.
and long seasons. And some of those longer seasons are before you have kids, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
longer season. And then when you
Yeah.
have kids, and then when they're a
Yep.
certain age, that's a season. And then I think understanding those seasons. And so I'm coaching a bunch of young acquisition entrepreneurs on how to buy businesses. And one of the guys really is like, hey, I don't want to kill myself on this deal. He's like, I'm mid 40s. I want to do it. I'm committed to do it. I have the capital stack and the knowledge, but like, I'm just not my 25-year-old self. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So the perspective shift that I recommended for him is your timeline will take longer. So
Yeah.
if you're like, hey, my guide rails
So true.
are, I'm working 50 hours a week, but that's it,
Mm-hmm.
then so be it. Right.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be some things in that quarter, that year, that don't get attended to that would be normally. And
Yep.
that's totally fine. I mean, with the
Yep.
last
Agreed.
business we bought, I gave myself some guardrails, and I'm actually kind of like experimenting with this to see how like little I can be involved so my team grows.
Mm,
But I said, hey, I'm going to work from 8 to 5 and that's it. And anything
mm-hmm.
that comes on the acquisition and onboarding that doesn't get done that day gets done the next day. And that perspective doesn't work for a lot of people. We have a great team that helps in a lot of areas. So this has been a 12-year journey. But
Mm-hmm.
I think thinking through that allowed me to say, okay, like, what are the really big things I need to do today?
Yep.
Right. And so I became so dialed into only doing the things that I knew would move it forward because I only had a certain
Yes.
amount of hours, that my time blocking, my focus, that was another skill that I sharpened even more by giving myself some boundaries.
That's like a whole other podcast because I have had to learn all that from scratch. 1,000,000%. Yes. I was going to say one more quick thing on balance. I think that we don't talk enough about your choice in partner. If you've
Mm-hmm.
chosen a partner in
Mm-hmm.
life, if you haven't, then that's great too. But if you've chosen a life partner, that like changes how every situation looks. So for example, I chose a partner who's also an entrepreneur. We quit our jobs together, like in the same week.
You
And
never
so
told me the
naturally,
story. We need to do
oh,
some deep
really?
dive into that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we weren't living together. We each still had our W-2s and we still like had our real estate going on and whatever, which is how we met. But we literally sat down one night and we were like, let's go all in, right? Because I don't think we can do it halfway. So let's quit our jobs together and let's move in together. And we didn't realize we were going to go into business together too in a lot of ways. But anyways, point being, so like as like a family unit, he and I, our life looks like a disaster. And it is. I mean, no doubt, right? But when it's like power of two, like we've both gone all in. And so it looks doubly unbalanced. So I feel like if you have a partner who maybe has a little bit more of a stable thing going while you kind of take on the risk on your side, perhaps it's a little bit more grounding, which I would
I
argue
don't
that
know. I mean, I
I would
think
argue
like
that,
the
yeah, his pursuits are grounding for me, but I don't know. It's all in your perspective.
I think that's right. I think for me, one of the questions I ask is, and this is like whether we're repping a seller or a buyer, is what does your spouse think about this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, and then we have this clarity tool we've built that we ask like couples to work through to really get clear on what they want collectively. Because I think you can have like, we're the same way. We have my spouse and I are both entrepreneurs, both super driven, and we have a real commitment to faith and family first. And we're aligned in that. But I think the thing that I've found that helps people succeed is you have to have a spouse that's supportive. They could be stay at home, they could be working a W-2, they could be both entrepreneurs, but they have to support you when you're going crazy. They
Yep.
have to support you when you're like, you're not performing and you're sucking and the business is not succeeding and it's a season. And all they tell you is, hey, you're going to be all right. We're going to be all
Yep.
right. You're doing a great job. If you don't have that support, I don't think it works. And the
Mm-hmm.
first oil company that I started with some guys in West Texas, we had one of our engineers, and this was a lesson that I learned. This is why we built some of these tools. He was a great engineer, was so excited to start this business. We had this great asset and this plan. And then we start getting into it, and doing a startup is so hard. That's why I want to buy businesses and help people buy businesses. It's way harder to start a business. But as we went through the fundraising process and just the journey of setting up a business, right? Like, hey, we don't have any technology. We don't have any office space. We don't have any infrastructure. Pretty soon I saw he was just kind of getting a little snippy and negative. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, man, like, what's going on? And he's like, oh, man, my wife, every night when I come home, she's like, hey, have you guys got the funding? Have you got this? Have you got that? And I don't think I can make it. And
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, I mean, like 45 days into the journey, which is super short, he's like, I got to go back and get a job. And so that was an experience that I
Dang.
like has been burned into my memory because
Yeah.
he was critical to that business, and that business ended up failing because we couldn't get the engineering support we needed. So having a spouse that they don't have to be entrepreneurial, they don't even need to understand what you do. I would encourage you to share as much as they want to know and you want to share. But at the end of the day, they need to, when you come home, say, hey, we love you. We're here for you. No matter what happens, we're going to be here for you. And that makes you feel 10 feet tall.
Yep.
Like, no doubt about it. Okay. So we're like right at the 30-minute mark, which is where we like to stop. Like, what's some advice on the mental game you would give somebody starting? Because you've been right in the fire. And so your perspective, I think, is super useful for people that are
Mm-hmm.
about to do this journey.
I think really succinctly, if you show up every single day, no matter how much it hurts, you'll find yourself on the other side. You will.
Mhm.
It might take 6 months, it might take 9, it might take 18, it might take 24, but I never, ever, 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 ever didn't show up. Even when it hurts so bad that I'm like, I can't face my employees today. I never didn't show up.
Love it. Yep, 100%. Well, Tato, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me. And I'm sure we're going to have you on soon on the Exceptional Companies podcast.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Exceptional Companies Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you liked this show, please reach out through our website, www.excoadvisors.com, for free tools to order a copy of Selling Main Street, or to sign up for our free webinar on how to sell your Main Street business.